Welcome back, everybody, to another 843 MPT tournament teaser. I'm back with another interview right here, although this time around not with a player from the tournament, but, well, I guess you could call it an expert interview with Rever right here, of course, a tournament veteran, so he should be having some interesting opinions about, what's going to go on in this upcoming tourney. So, Rever, first question right at you. I was just wondering, in a more general sense, compared to normal MPT or to previous tournament metas that we've seen already, what are some civs that you think could be deceptively good here? Could be picks that people might not have on the radar right now. Any interesting priorities that you personally see for this tourney?
Yeah. Firstly, hey mate, always a pleasure chatting, Civ. Good to be back. Yeah, in terms of priorities, I think this tournament is certainly very different in compared to the last one, considering that once it's more than two teams, so instead of a 3v3, once you have the 2v2v2, I feel like there are elements there that honestly make it closer towards a seton than a normal teamer. Because
Definitely.
usually, if you have two teams and you get the locations from your teammates where they are, you can quickly decipher where the other three or other four would be. But in this one, you're only going to have one other teammate's location, and the other four are going to be a little bit more unknown. So I think that my view would probably be that the expansionist trait becomes really important in that sort of scenario. A bit like when you play UU Seaton and the civs like Russia and America that start with a scout have a big advantage because they can quickly see who their neighbor is, perhaps where their resources are, and get a really good feel for the map early. You can prepare where you're going to plant cities, etc. So I feel like the expansions trait for Zulu and Inca will only be amplified in that sort of team structure.
So it's
Um,
yeah, just quickly. So it's about the scouting for you, not really for the popping because we can't pop cities, but the scouting will be so valuable because there's so many opponents.
Correct. So these civs already have a great unique unit, and Inca's agricultural as well. And on top of that, the information that you get from having a scout early and being able to understand the map, where your opponents are, where you should be planning your cities, I think that's incredibly valuable when you don't know half of the locations of all players on the map. So I would have thought the scout becomes super value in that sort of environment. Um, Yeah, so my prediction, I know I watched that video just before where you sort of gave the example of the iron map where each player will start with iron in their capital city.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was I thought it was interesting when you I think you had Persia going first, then Celts, and then Rome. And I thought that's interesting because I think, yes, having iron in the capital will amplify the the benefit of having those iron sieves. But probably a couple of things that I think will be interesting to see is, firstly, a bit like when we saw three agricultural sieves in the 3v3 tourney. Often, three agricultural was too much agricultural. I feel like no team would pick two iron sieves because the cost of upgrade from the gold would be super expensive. Part of the benefit of having iron sieves is when you have other sieves that can accumulate gold and pass it to the iron sieve so they can upgrade. And so I wouldn't expect any team to necessarily take two iron sieves. And then if you're the first team picking, you have a big advantage because if you assume no other team would take two iron sieves, in theory, you could pick your other sieve that you want first, and then wait to get one of Persia or Rome or Celts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but then of course that would be contingent on you thinking that whatever Civ you're first picking gives you a bigger advantage over the other Civ picks from the other teams than the disadvantage you get from having the lowest tier Iron Civ, if that makes sense, right? So It's a trade-off in that regard. But if you think the three iron sieves are relatively equal in strength, then yeah, I could definitely see that being a strategy. If, of course, nobody ends up picking two iron sieves, because on the maps where everybody has iron, people there might be people who view it a little bit differently. So it is a gamble, right? You're kind of hoping there.
Yeah, that's right. And especially if you're in a 2v2 and you're both iron sieves, um, your timing of your GA becomes really important because if you assume that you're going to have to fund your own upgrades, it gets pretty tricky with timing because you can't really rely on your teammate because they'll need the gold for their upgrades. So that's tricky. And the other thing is that the remaining civs, if they have iron in their capital, they'll still have access to the swordsman, which is still an incredible unit. It's obviously missing something that the other three have, but you'll still have access to that unit along with all the other benefits of that civ. So, personally, if I think that expansionist is super valuable, and Inca will start with agricultural, and they've got the Chaz, you know, still having access to the swordsman with their iron and cap, I think just makes Inca super strong. And so if I was picking first in that iron map, I'd be more than happy taking Inca first, and then hopefully none of the other opponents take two iron sieves and just getting the other one that remains. Yeah. Probably the only other thing I would add as well is that even if all three iron sieves go first, I personally probably rate Rome above Persia.
Above Persia, even. Oh, that's interesting. I thought maybe above Celts, because I feel like that's a bit of a toss-up. But I really like Persia here. So, what do you like better about Rome?
So obviously, most units in the ancient era will have two defense, right? Impies, spearmen, etc. I'm assuming no one's going to pick Greece for the hoplite, and so already the mathematics are in your favor with either of the legionary or the immortal, because 3 and 4 are both above 2. So yes, your mathematics are better with the immortal, but you're still favored in that duel. But the big difference is that there are not going to be any attack modifiers. So you're stuck with that 3 attack and you're stuck with that 4 attack. But on defense, where you do get modifiers with hills and walls, etc., legionaries have a huge bonus bump from those defense modifiers. And so the slightly less attack, I think, is outweighed by the benefit of defense with the multipliers. You can stick 3 or 4 legionaries in a city on a hill with walls, and to take that city will just be so difficult, so much more difficult than if you only had 3 or 4 immortals there. And so I think that versatility is very valuable.
I can see that definitely, because even if you capture a city, it'll be that much easier to hold it. So I see the benefits there. We'll see what the players think of that. Another interesting thing, just because you said the expansionist trade is probably going to be very valuable, and you mentioned Zulu and Inca is already existing top tier civs in MPT that could get boosted by this. Um, I was wondering then, how do you think the Hittites slot into the priority, especially among the horse civs? Because I feel like Egypt and Iroquois are definitely going to be high tier civs on the horse maps, but I wasn't quite sure about the Hittites because there's widely different opinions on them in the community. However, they are also expansionist, so they might actually be pretty decent here in your opinion too, or what do you feel? How do you feel about them?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I reckon that after the first couple of games, teams will get a very good feel for if the scout is as valuable as I think it is. So it might turn out that after the first couple, the maps are in such a way that you can quickly recognize where opponents are, so the scout's no longer as valuable. So I think it'll change quickly. I think that if it does prove to be important, having that early recon from the scout, I reckon Hittites are great. It's got the industrious trait. The 3 man is still, it's like a supercharged impy with the 2 attack. So I think there's definitely reasons why Hittite will be a lot more popular in this tournament compared to the last one, for sure.
That's great to hear because I love to see some more, yeah, obscure Civ picks. That's always fun. And people have been talking a big game about picking Hittites before in tourneys, and it hasn't necessarily come to fruition every time. So I'd be looking forward to that. Now, to wind down the interview, I was just gonna ask you, of the three teams, and you've of course played in tourneys as well against many of these players, which do you think looks the strongest going into it? Cheese and Anti, of course, not on the same team this time around, gonna have to battle it out. Or maybe you stick with your old teammate and Team Halu, but yeah, what do you think? Who's gonna take it?
Yeah, well, I think the draft is really good because, and I've just opened up the teams. You get really good balance when you have drafting like that, rather than people picking their teammates directly. And so when I look at the teams, like the first few picks are all super balanced, and then I think about it, and I assume pretty much every player on every team will have a game. Um, and so in my mind, it's sort of the last two picks, or who has the strongest last couple of picks, because that can very much be a deciding factor. And when I look at the last two picks of each team, so for Anti, you've got Old Prospector, and I think that's Life of Moor for that other one.
Hmm.
And you've got for Halu, Token, and Bonehead, and then for Cheese, you've got Sooty and MJ. And I feel like of those pairs, for everyone's last two picks, Sooty and MJ would probably be the strongest, would probably be my feel. And so I think that probably gives Cheese's team a little bit of an edge. Um, and on top of that, I think that like some players in the community just have great like synergy when they play together. And I think Cheese and Rab are one of those combinations that when they play, they just, they communicate in the same way. They're probably going to be on voice chat. And so that synergy, I think, will be super important. And their team's looking pretty good to me.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense, I guess. I'm not sure how the general sense in the community is, but that's an interesting point, especially about focusing on the lower ranked players. We'll see, of course, you never know about the availability, so it's all just speculation at this point. But yeah, thanks for your opinions and thanks for coming on here. And to everybody watching, please tune in when the tournament kicks off on Monday, February 13th. It's going to be a great old time that week, 9 games to decide who takes the crown in this 2v2v2 MPT tournament. I hope to see everybody there.